Have you ever wondered what it's like to work in law enforcement? From deputies on patrol, forensics, to some of our cold cases and how some of our officers give back to the community. We'll share stories from the hard-working men and women who serve the citizens of York County. This is YCSO Behind the Badge, the official podcast of the York County Sheriff's Office. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Badge, the official podcast of the York County Sheriff's Office. You are in luck because this is our first podcast at the YCSO, and each week we hope we'll bring you an inside look at the York County Sheriff's Office. We'll talk to deputies on patrol. We'll talk to detention officers and see what it's like to work in corrections. We'll dig into some cold cases and those investigations every now and then, and we'll reveal some of the multitudes of all of the untold stories of how our officers work here and give back to the community every day. All of those stories from neighbors, your neighbors, the hardworking men and women of the York County Sheriff's Office. Hi, I'm Trent Ferris. I'm the Public Information Officer here at the York County Sheriff's Office and also your host for the next half hour or so. We're going to try to keep these podcasts about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, but if the conversation gets really good, we'll just keep on trucking along. But we hope to keep them around 30 minutes. So, before we get started on our very, very first podcast, if you could do me a favor, if you're not already, go check us out on our social media pages. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. YouTube is where you can also listen to these podcasts there. Eventually, we're going to do some video casts, some vidcasts, where we're going to record these as a video, but we're going to have the audio up on our YouTube page. But if you're listening to it on a podcasting service, you can also listen to us here on, we're on the Anchor podcasting service, but you can also hear us on Breaker, Google Podcast, Overcast, and Spotify. That's a popular one. So those are just a few to name. If you go to the Anchor podcasting service, they'll be able to direct you into the right direction. And lastly, if you can also sign up today for our Notify Me alerts. That's Notify Me alerts. That's on our website. You go to our website, yorkcountysheriff.com, click on the Notify Me button right there, about halfway down as you scroll the page, and that's where you can sign up for email and text alerts directly to your phone if there's anything that should happen that is pretty significant in the county, so you can stay up to date with incidents here in York County. So, you would think that for the first podcast, we would bring in the head man himself, Sheriff Kevin Tolson, but the week that we chose to start this podcast falls on a pretty important anniversary of a fallen officer for the Sheriff's Office. And a little background for you, just to get you where we're going here. We're going to dive into this a little bit, but 88 years ago, on July 17th, 1932, tragedy struck the York County Sheriff's Office, or at that time they were called the York County Rural Police, and a lot of folks around these parts that were alive back then probably remember the officers were called the Rurals. Don't make me have to call the Rurals if they needed to call somebody for some help if there was something going on. So 88 years ago, Rural Police Officer Elliott Harris was shot and killed after he stopped a man and his wife in their car on Highway 21 near Fort Mill and attempted to arrest the man for reckless driving. Now, to give you a geographical location where this happened, the location was on Highway 21 near the North Carolina-South Carolina state line, about 200 yards into South Carolina, which is now the Carowinds Boulevard area. So it's right there where, surprisingly enough, in the same area where the Mike Doty Memorial Highway is. So, pretty interesting. Real quick synopsis: as a struggle ensued with the man, his wife, Beatrice Snipes, snatched Officer Harris's revolver from his holster and shot him 4 times. Unable to start their car, the couple took the slain officer's car and sped on into Charlotte, North Carolina, where they later surrendered to police. Now, we're going to get into the details of how they surrendered to police. And the slaying immediately evolved into a triple tragedy. The Snipes mother that they were heading off into Charlotte to visit suffered a heart attack, and she died. And then on that same day, a man racing a motorcycle to tell Officer Harris's wife what had happened so she could get to the hospital if his collided with an automobile and was killed instantly. So it was a bad day all around. And so we're going to hear all about that because we've got a really good book that we found online. It's authored by T. Felder Dorn. It's called Death of a Policeman, Birth of a Baby, and it goes into some great detail on what happened in this book. So today, for time's sake, we're just going to go focus on the case, the incident, and a little bit of the trial. And the book also goes into the life after the incident of the woman, Beatrice Snipes, and Clyde Snipes, and the little child, the baby that Beatrice Snipes was carrying at the time. So, but we're just going to stick with the incident and the trial today because, like I said, we only have about 30 minutes. So, but it is very detailed about the account of how Elliott Harris died, and a lot of differences and a lot of similarities of policing then and now. So, to set the scene for you, to give you an idea, this is what happened on that day in July 1932. Elliott Harris was a rural police officer in York County, South Carolina. On a Sunday afternoon in July, the shooting occurred on the highway not far from the North Carolina border, like we said. Now, remember, 1932. Go back to your history classes in school. This was during an era of when the Great Depression and Prohibition was all over the news. That was the main focus of what folks were talking about during this time. So just put yourselves in one of those old movies that may put you into the shoes of somebody living in the Great Depression era of 1932. Now, in this book, Part 1 opens up with a description of the events of the crime that happened that day. And I'm going to read an excerpt from Death of a Policeman, Birth of a Baby, and from page 17, it gets right into it. Clyde Snipes, his wife Beatrice Ferguson Snipes, both of Columbia, and two friends of Rock Hill residents, Spencer Morton and Edna Milling of Fort Mill, had left Rock Hill and were headed to Charlotte to visit Clyde's stepmother, who was seriously ill. The party was traveling in a Morton's Ford Roadster, and Clyde was driving. Beatrice sat in the middle, and Spencer by the passenger side door, and Edna was sitting in Spencer's lap. So these Ford Roadsters were not one of your big F-150s of today. They were probably really small vehicles. And later on that day, between 3 and 4 o'clock on that Sunday afternoon, the car was passing by in Fort Mill heading towards Charlotte. And rural policeman Elliott Harris was patrolling the area of Highway 21, and he and fellow Fort Mill resident Kenyon Young, a student at Furman University, was driving south in a Dodge Coupe with Young at the wheel. So Elliott Harris was not driving. It says here that this young man, Kenyon Young, was driving the vehicle. So we don't know what this was. We don't know if it was a patrol car or if he was just on a ride-along or just job shadowing for the day. Because he was a student and he was in the car. He was there with Elliott Harris, but Elliott Harris wasn't driving. So, moving on, when the two vehicles went by each other, Officer Harris saw that the Roadster was being driven recklessly and at a high rate of speed. Harris directed Young to turn around and give pursuit to the car, and they stopped the car about 200 yards from the North Carolina border. The Dodge Coupe pulled in front, and Officer Harris got out of his car to speak with the driver. Now, as it was then, you'll hear on the news all the time, reporters, anchors will always say, just a routine traffic stop. And any officer today will tell you right off the bat that there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop. Back then and today. So you'll have to get in. We'll get into the topics of traffic stops and what to do during the traffic stops and whatnot. So we'll save that topic for another podcast in the future. But just to give you an idea, it was a traffic stop. And a lot of deputies will tell you that not every traffic stop is just quote-unquote routine. So, back to the book. And during the stop, after Snipes was unable to produce a driver's license, Officer Harris told them that he was going to have to arrest him for reckless driving and driving without a license. Clyde Snipes jumped from the car and declared, "I'm not going to jail." So things are getting heated right now. And a scuffle ensued when Officer Harris attempted to put Clyde Snipes in the Dodge coupe and take him to Fort Mill as he was under arrest. Now, then all this, we'll learn later on, they added a charge later on as resisting arrest. So, before we go on any further about what was going on during the incident, Kenyon Young, the best witness that they had to this incident, was during the inquest after the fact. His sworn statement really goes into detail about what happened. So we're going to read that here. This is the statement of Kenyon Young, the young man who was a Furman University student that was in the car with Mr. Harris, Officer Harris at the time. See, here we go. And remember, this is 1932. After Officer Harris had placed Snipes under arrest, I got out of the car and started back to help Mr. Harris. Beatrice Ferguson Snipes got out of the car and grabbed for Mr. Harris's pistol. Mr. Harris then drew the pistol and told the men and women that he would have to take Snipes to jail at Fort Mill, and told Beatrice Snipes that if she did not stop, he would also take her to jail. Now, once again, this is 1932. There's no radio system. There's no walkie-talkies. There's nothing like the communication systems that we have today in 2020. So if this were to happen today, I'm sure that if a deputy had an incident with a traffic stop that was going sideways, that one call on the radio, it'd be like kicking over an anthill here in York County. Every deputy within an ear's reach and would be on their way, code 3, to help assist what was going on. But this is 1932. It was just one officer and a guy who apparently was just a ride-along who was hanging out for the day. So, after she stopped, after Mr. Harris told Officer Harris told her to stop, she stopped, and Mr. Harris returned his pistol to his holster and took Snipes by the arm and started towards his car. Mr. Harris reached into his car to get the handcuffs when Beatrice Ferguson made another grab. Ferguson, they keep calling her Beatrice Ferguson, but just remember this is Beatrice Ferguson Snipes, the wife of Clyde Snipes. So he keeps saying Beatrice Ferguson. She made another grab for his pistol. I grabbed at her and stopped her, and then Snipes started back towards his car. So it was a situation that was all over the place. Then Officer Harris started after Snipes, and Beatrice Ferguson made another grab for the pistol. And he says this all happened very quickly. So it was and we're reading this, it's taking some time, but this probably was all happening within a couple of minutes of each other. And then Officer Harris told me to get back and get his blackjack out of his car, in which I did to give to him. Now, if you don't know what a blackjack is, it is an older version of what a police baton from 1932. It was made of leather and had some metal in it, and it was wrapped in leather. Now, they moved on after using blackjacks, and some officers actually used blackjacks up until the 1970s and early 80s. But they also moved on to what they call a P24 baton, and it looks like one of those L-shaped. You've probably seen them on television shows. It's a stick with another handle with a knob off to the side. So they moved on to that. And now today we carry what we call retractable batons. And I mean, if you sling it, it opens up to about maybe 2.5, 3 feet long, but it's maybe a foot before it's retracted out. So that's what we carry today. And we won't digress into the uses of force. We'll use that for another podcast in the future, but just to give you an idea, he was doing everything he can to put this person under arrest, and he even said, "Hey, go get my blackjack. I've got up the ante here." So, moving on. During all this was happening, Beatrice Ferguson slipped up from the rear of the car and picked out again for the third time, grabbed Officer Harris's pistol, which was a .38 police special, which was carried in a holster on his right leg and hung on his right thigh. She pulled the pistol out of the holster, and Mr. Harris did not see her when she did it, but he did feel it when she grabbed the pistol, and he turned around and turned Mr. Snipes loose, and he turned around and he made a grab for Beatrice Ferguson, and then she shot him. The first shot, Beatrice Ferguson struck Mr. Harris in the right leg, which crumbled underneath him. So he fell. He got shot in the leg and he fell to the ground, most likely, if anybody who would get shot would. and after he was shot for the first time, he succeeded in grabbing her around the neck, but he could not hold her as his leg crumbled underneath him again, and he fell to the ground, and that's when she shot him 3 more times. Wow. And once he fell, she shot him at least twice as he laid on the ground. Wow. So he Young, now doing the thing that he should have been doing. I mean, he was trying to do everything he could to help. He did try to go get a rifle that was in the car, and then Beatrice turned the weapon on him and told him to stop, and they got into the car and they left. Wow. This was very, very detailed. And we're skipping through a lot of this quickly because, like I said, this is a 30-minute podcast, and we're trying to get through a lot today. But, again, this is from the book Death of a Policeman, Birth of a Child, and it's by T. Felder Dorn. So if you wanted to get a copy of it, you can do that on Amazon just like we did. So the events that took place afterwards, this is from an account of Edna Milling and the two people, Edna Milling and Spencer Morton, who helped Kenyon Young. They were the two people that were in the car with the Snipes as they were heading to Charlotte. And after they had taken off and left them, they helped Kenyon Young get the wounded officer into the Ford Roadster, the car that was left there. And the four then hurried by into Fort Mill, where they hoped to find medical help for Officer Harris. And while there, Young reported the shooting to the chief of police in Fort Mill. There, the chief told him to take Officer Harris to Rock Hill for emergency care at the Fennel Infirmary. Well, there you go. The little side bit of history here for you, a history bite. The Fennel Infirmary, or is known as the William Wallace Fennel House, was the hospital in Rock Hill at the time, and it was later named the St. Philip's Mercy Hospital. But in 1997, it was saved. This building, this house was saved from demolition by Russell Frace, and he is restoring it currently. You can go by there today and see it. It's on Confederate Avenue in Rock Hill. So I've gone by there a couple times. It's really neat to see. So this in 1932, that's where Officer Harris was taken to get medical treatment. So there at the hospital, the doctor's report states that Harris had sustained 1 gunshot wound to the forehead and 1 to the chest and 2 in the leg. He arrived at the hospital at 5 p.m. where Dr. W.B. Ward determined that he was in a dying condition and that the chest wound was fatal. Dr. Ward certified later that Officer Harris died of shock around 5:30 p.m. Officer Harris was survived by his wife Eula and his 4 children, Elliot Jr., age 6, twins Lloyd and Ann, age 4, and Geddes, a 4-month-old. Officer Elliot P. Harris, otherwise known as A.B., some people called him A.B., Elliot Harris was 26 years old and had 4 kids. Wow, man. Tragic. And 2 more tragic deaths happened this day. We mentioned them earlier, where the Clyde Snipes stepmother, they were on their way to Charlotte. She had a heart attack after learning what happened. They say that the heart attack wasn't brought on but what the news was, but she was already had some health problems, so they don't know whether the shock is one gave her a heart attack or just her normal health problems were. But also a man named Lewis Potts, he learned when he learned about his friend and he was unlikely to survive, he immediately decided to head back to Fort Mill and tell Elliot Harris's wife so that she could get down to Rock Hill before he died. And while he was leaving Rock Hill, Potts crashed Harris's motorcycle. So he was on his motorcycle at a high rate of speed into another car, and he died instantly. So it was a bad day in 1932. July 17th, 1932. So on July 18th, the day after, on a Sunday, on a Monday. No, this was a Sunday. That's right. Yeah, excuse me. So July 18th, 1932, they had 2 funerals that were held that same day. One for Elliot Harris, also known as A.B., and for Lewis Potts. and that the funeral services were conducted at the home at 5 p.m. the following a burial in Unity Cemetery. Now, if you don't know where Unity Cemetery is, it's in Fort Mill off of Tom Hall Street, and there's a marker there in the cemetery commemorating Officer Elliott Harris. So go check that out sometime if you can. And it says here, among those who attended were 103 law enforcement officers from all over the area. And a part of the service that terrified and chilled Eula Harris, the wife of Elliott Harris, was that the volley of gunshots fired by the honor guard. So everything was, full honors for Elliott Harris that day. So you're probably wondering what happened to Clyde and Beatrice Snipes. Well, Beatrice Snipes turned herself in to Charlotte police that night, and then on July 18th, the Monday night, a bi-state posse comprised of police from Rock Hill, Charlotte, and as well as state troopers apprehended Clyde Snipes. He had been at a home about 4 miles south of Charlotte, and he was stretched out on the porch of that home, talking to members of the family that were at that home of a Mr. Griffith, and members of the posse surrounded the house, and Snipes was taken by surprise, and he offered no resistance and told the arresting officers that he had intended to surrender the next day. So it was good that everybody, and then they didn't have to spend days and days and days looking for people, because sometimes now when you head into Charlotte after committing a crime in South Carolina, you have to work together to track those people down. So, but moving on, getting to what's amazing about this and about 1932 and now is the people of York County all rallied up support and supported the Harris family, much like our citizens did in 2018 for the line of duty death of Mike Doty. I mean, this was in the heart of the Great Depression, and on that date, during that time, the citizens rallied together and raised money for the family. On the first day, they raised $83. And in 1932, $83 would have been around $1,400 from what I've done research. So $1,400. And then when it was all over, said and done with, after a couple of days, they raised $124. People were chipping $1 to $10, all to help out this family. And about $124 today would be around $2,100. So that was huge for the time. And when a police officer's income, or the average income for anybody during 1932 in the middle of the Great Depression, was about $1,300 a year. So that would probably help the family out greatly. And they said in the for a plea that they put into the paper to ask people to donate money to the family, they used a quote from the 6-year-old son of Elliott Harris, Elliot Jr. He says, quote, "I've got to be brave for mother because he's 6 years old. His dad just died. He's the oldest of the 4 children, and now he knows that I've got to be the man of the house." So, wow. Because back in 1932, that was the way things were. And so it's pretty admirable of that young man saying, "I've got to be brave for mother." So, moving forward, after she was arrested on July 19th, the day after she surrendered, Beatrice Snipes made a statement in Chester, and she claimed that she had grabbed Harris's gun when it was in his hand as he was pointing it at her, and she claimed that her actions were in self-defense. And when she went on to express great regret, it says here, she quotes, "I didn't mean to kill him. I didn't know I had hurt him that so badly until I gave up in Charlotte. I wouldn't have killed him intentionally. I never had nothing like that in my heart to harm anybody. I've never harmed anybody or did anybody dirt in my life." Now, this is how they talked in 1932. "I never harmed anybody or did any dirt in my life. I was raised in the Odd Fellows Orphan Home in Greenville, South Carolina. I wish the public would not think too hard of me." We can go into a lot of opinions here, but 4 shots. 4 shots. I'll just leave that on the table right there. Hey, I hope the people won't think so bad of me if she shot him 4 times. Anyway. So, moving on to the trial. She was logged into the, moving forward, 2 days later, she was logged into the state penitentiary, and upon her arrival there, she reported as remarking that it was a hard-looking place, but that she had many friends in it. So she may have had a sketchy past, and that's probably spelled out in the book a little bit more that we're not going to get into. So if you want to go pick it up and read it or look more into this, they probably explain a little bit more of that. There were 3 warrants issued for Clyde Snipes, one for accessory before the fact of murder, one for grand larceny, stealing the car after the shooting, and one for resisting arrest. When questioned at the York County Jail on July 20th, Snipes admitted to using Harris's car to leave the scene, but denied being even a witness to the shooting of the officer. It's hard to believe because he was the one being arrested at the time, and she was the one trying to get him to be not arrested. In the middle of August, the York County jailer, L.H. Stevenson, sensed a strange atmosphere in the jail and suspected that the inmates might be planning something. He had a search of the jail conducted, and the results confirmed that an escape attempt was in preparation, and items found were knives that had been smuggled into the jail and other weapons, including a piece of pipe and a brick. Jailer Stevenson thought that the ringleader for the plot was Clyde Snipes. So, just gives you an interesting point of view of the people that we're dealing with here. So we're going to move on to just a real quick of the trial for Mrs. Snipes. The trial took place in December, and the trial was on December 5th, 1932, so that's moving pretty quick. This happened in July, trials in December of 1932, and it happened right here at the York County Courthouse, the one right downtown in York, the historical courthouse, which is pretty interesting to know that something of this magnitude happened. I mean, I'm sure it would have happened, but it's just neat. It's neat to think about that. The solicitor at the time was W. Gist Finley, G-I-S-T, W. Gist Finley. He prosecuted the case, and here's a familiar name. Joseph R. Moss and R.B. Hildebrand were the defense attorneys. Now, if Joseph R. Moss might ring a bell to you, because the building that we're sitting in right now is the Joseph R. Moss Justice Center. And if you don't know, Joseph R. Moss went on to be an Associate Justice and Chief Justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court. So there's another history fact. He was in the Supreme Court from 1956 to 1975. So they were the defense attorneys for Miss Snipes. It says here that the courtroom was filled to capacity, and if you've been over there in the historical courthouse, it's a pretty big room. A lot of seats in there. It's almost like a old-time movie theater seating kind of style. I mean, a lot of room in there, so the whole place was full. And Eula Harris, the widow of policeman Elliott Harris, was in the courtroom as well. And Mrs. Snipes and her 4 small children were also present. Oh, no, excuse me. No, excuse me. I'm sorry. Let's go back. Mrs. Snipes was there, but Eula Harris's children were also there during the trial. So once the trial was over with and everything was said and done, just over 3 hours after getting the case, the jury returned, and they found Beatrice Snipes simply was found guilty of murder, a verdict under South Carolina law that mandated the death penalty. The York Enquirer reported that just before the verdict, the jury was 11-1 for the verdict rendered, with one man favoring recommendation for mercy. Wow. 11-1. And at the sentencing, Judge Cease, who was presiding over the case, Judge Cease pronounced the death sentence. And this is how this is from what he read at the bench. The sentence of law is that you be taken hence to the state penitentiary in Columbia, South Carolina, there to be kept in close confinement and safe custody until Friday, the 7th day of April, 1933, and on that day, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 12 noon, that you shall then and there suffer the penalty of death by electrocution in a manner provided by law. And may God have mercy on your soul. Wow. Just like they would say it in the movies. I mean, it's like, I bet it was in one of those deep voices. I don't know. Just that's what I'm imagining here. So, well, that would change, of course, because as we mentioned earlier, Miss Snipes said that she was pregnant, and she was pregnant with a child at the time of the shooting. And the date of April 7th, 1933 was chosen in compliance with South Carolina law that prescribed execution of an expectant mother until some weeks after the child had been delivered. And now the book goes into the life of that child and how Miss Snipes gave birth in prison, and then 3 months later she was expected to be sentenced to death. She was sentenced to death, but electrocuted. And because she was pregnant at her execution date was determined after she was going to deliver that child. So, but later on, because the public learned that Miss Snipes was pregnant, there was a outrage and a groundswell of protests. And that public outrage over a mother being executed persuaded then Governor Ibra C. Blackwood to commute her sentence to life on January 10th, 1933. And then later on, here we go, she was pardoned by Governor Olin D. Johnston on April 10th, 1945. Now, for Clyde, for his part in the murder, this is Beatrice Snipes' husband, he was only sentenced to 7 months in prison. Now, we're already past the 30-minute mark, but real quick, again, if you're interested in learning more about this incident, we bought this book on Amazon. Again, it's called Death of a Policeman, Birth of a Baby, A Crime and Its Aftermath by T. Felder Dorn. And it's nice to have this historical document written down so we can now, again, never forget the fallen and the sacrifice of Officer Elliott P. Harris, much like we did when we made the documentary video of the night of January 16th, 15th, 16th, and 17th of the line of duty death of Mike Doty. So hopefully 88 years from now, somebody doing, I don't know if they'll have podcasts 88 years from now, but hopefully somebody will also learn about the sacrifice that Mike Doty made and all law enforcement officers make every day. So, how you like it? First podcast. Like it? Yes, no? Email us. You can email us, message us on Facebook. Give us a shout out on Twitter. You can email me at sheriff.pio@yorkcountygov.com if you have any suggestions of what you'd like to hear on the podcast. But you have to do me that favor. If you're not already, go check us out on our social media feeds, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, where you can also listen to this on YouTube if you don't have Spotify or Google Podcasts or Breaker or Overcast or any of those other podcasting services. Of course, Anchor, we're on it. And also remember to sign up for those Notify Me alerts, YorkCountySheriff.com. You can get significant events right there to your email and your text messages when things happen. So thank you for listening. This is the York County Sheriff's Office Behind the Badge official podcast. And thank you for listening. And please join us again next time when we have a myriad of different topics to talk about. Thank you and have a great day.